Hello friends, thanks for being here. My name is Aisling and of course I'm here today to talk about books. And with this video I'm leaving 2023 behind. So today's video is my December wrap up. Felt like I didn't read that much in December, but in hindsight, I actually read quite a few books. Without further ado, we're just going to get straight into it. So, the first book that I read was one that I'd been really excited about. So, it is the prequel to a 5-star book for me last year. And the prequel, of course, is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. If you've been here a while, you'll know that I was absolutely obsessed. I'm still obsessed with Legends and Lattes. So Bookshops and Bone Dust is prequel to that book, as I've already said. So we follow a younger Viv when she's starting out in her career as a bounty hunter, and she is trucking along trying to find this really powerful necromancer when she gets a little bit cocky and gets herself injured. So she gets left behind then by her group in a little sleepy seaside village called Merk. And this book follows somewhat of a similar kind of vein to Legends and Lattes, but is different. So she kind of meets a group of unlikely friends and she winds up spending a lot of her time in a bookshop, and then she encounters a little bit of trouble and of course gets involved. And again, it's quite low stakes. It's really just a simple, easy read. I will say, didn't enjoy this one as much as Legends and Lattes, but it might have been just a case of Legends and Lattes for me being such a right book, right time, right place kind of book. Whereas I was just looking forward to this and I had really high expectations for it. Whereas with Legends and Lattes, I had zero expectations. I think the writing has probably matured a bit in this. The plotting is actually probably a little bit better as well. Maybe a little bit more happens in this than happens in Legends and Lattes. For the most part, really enjoyed it. Just didn't enjoy it as much as Legends and Lattes. But if you're looking for more of the same, then absolutely. Bookshops and Bone Dust. Go read it. It's just quite lovely as well. And then following on from there, I was kind of simultaneously listening to an audiobook. So I was like in the mood for kind of like a snowed in thriller. So I went and found myself one on my library app, and the book that I listened to was The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. Didn't really know what to expect. We follow a group of university friends who for years have been getting together over, I think, New Year's, and just having a little holiday where they all stay together and catch up. And I think that is actually such a lovely idea. I would love to do that with my friends, but anyway, hey ho, money is tough to come by and real life is hard. So we follow this group of university friends, and this year they find themselves in like this isolated hunting lodge in, I think it was like north of Scotland. So it's like really rural. It's like end of the line on the train line. They're really kind of in the middle of nowhere. You kind of see where this is going. Once they arrive, they get snowed in and they kind of realise that they're unable to leave. Like, fair enough. But before long, a body shows up. We kind of go from there. I thought this was okay. I am not a super duper thriller reader in general. So do keep that in mind whenever I review a thriller or anything like that. Because I feel like I'm coming from a place of like, meh. A lot of the time, which isn't fair either, because some of them are actually so good and so clever and brilliant. I found the characters in this really difficult to like. There's quite an array of characters, but they're all quite similar, I think, in some ways. Really privileged as well, just really like didn't really care when a body showed up kind of thing. But you don't actually know when you're reading the book who's dead until near the end. So it's kind of told in like dual timelines, which is quite interesting, and I enjoyed that. And I was like, oh, who actually died and how did they die? So it was as much about like finding out who the body belonged to as how it got there. One thing that I will say, and it might be a little bit of a spoiler, I'm really sorry if it is, but something that I don't like in a thriller when something has gone wrong is that the person to blame has mental health issues. I feel like often that's a bit of a cop out, and it's not always a great portrayal of different mental illnesses. And it's like, oh, well, they were schizophrenic, so they went and they murdered people. I mean, sure, people with schizophrenia have murdered people, but so have people with apparently no mental illnesses. So, you know, I just don't like this kind of easy trope of falling back on people who are quite vulnerable. I know sometimes it makes for an interesting story, but yeah, I don't really like that about thrillers sometimes. That said, it was fast paced, it was easy to read, and it definitely met the criteria of what I was looking for at that time. And then the next book, I had an Audible credit and I was feeling a bit like, how about some sci-fi? And then I've kind of seen this book recommended around a lot recently as something that is quite accessible in terms of sci-fi. So I picked up on Audible with my credit Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, not really knowing what I was getting myself in for, but I had heard the audiobook in particular recommended, so I gave it a go. So we follow our main character, Ryland, I think his name is, and he wakes up on a spaceship. And on this spaceship, he's kind of there pretty much on his own, and he doesn't really know how he got there. He doesn't know why he's there. He doesn't really know anything about his mission. He's just woken up and things are all a bit messed up. And we kind of witness him figuring out what's going on through a series of like current day narrative and then some flashbacks as well as he kind of remembers what's going on. It is sort of like an end of the world mission, and that's kind of pretty much all I can say. Again, I don't want to give anything away, but there's a really kind of unorthodox character in this book, and it was probably one of my favourite characters in a book in quite a while. So there's that. It's really kind of witty and a bit silly in parts. It was a little bit sciencey in parts, so I can't say whether or not the science stacks up to real life. But to be honest, I didn't care because I didn't really understand it anyway. That said, it wasn't too heavy that it took away from the story for me at all. I quite enjoyed it, I will say. I didn't know what to expect, as I said. I'm a little bit unsure about the ending. Like, it worked. I don't know if it worked for me, but it worked. I'd be happy to recommend this book for sure for people who are kind of like me, who are a little bit like, oh, I might dip my toe into some sci-fi, but I don't know where to start. I just don't know what to do. So yeah, it was quite fun, quite easy to read. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Okay, and then the next book that I picked up, so I think it was like book number 4, was a book that I bought in Belfast in September, and I was really excited to find it. Even though I didn't know much about the book, I just loved the cover of it, and it's part of a trilogy, I think, if not even more books. Definitely 3 books anyway, and it is translated from French, and I suppose I should mention what that book actually is. It is A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos, and it is translated from French, as I said, and the translator is Hildegard Searle. So I actually have such a respect for translators, especially after reading an article about Ken Liu translating Chinese works into English. It was a New York Times article. It was really interesting. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So this book is like a young adult book, as I said, and it is translated from French, as I've also mentioned. I bought this book knowing very little about it, to be honest. I'd read mixed reviews on this one, but just basically because of the cover, I really wanted to like it. I felt that it did have a good start. So in this world, following a cataclysmic event, I think it was called the Rupture, the world was shattered into many different floating islands, which are now known as arcs. So this is an arc on the cover. A spirit of like an immortal ancestor resides on each of these arcs, and each of these spirits possesses like a unique power. So we follow our protagonist Ophelia. She's a young woman, and she is trying to navigate this world. She's somebody who cares very little for appearance, and she's well known for her ability to like read the past of objects when she touches them. She also has an ability that allows her to travel through mirrors, which is quite fun. So her life is essentially disrupted when she's promised to a man in marriage, and this man is from a distant arc. And this man Thorn, he's like an influential member of a distant clan, and Ophelia basically must leave all that she knows and everybody that she knows to go live on this distant arc with this man who's really distant and cold and bizarre. Like, quite soon she learns she's a bit of a pawn in a political game, and honestly through the whole book I kind of felt like she was really being used and walked on, which wasn't nice. It sounds promising to me, but I couldn't get around the fact that I just didn't like any of the characters. I didn't really like the main character, didn't like how she was being treated, and it just seemed a bit weird and old fashioned, but like not in a good way to me personally. That said, I can see people really enjoying this book. It is a bit fun. I thought maybe it went on in some parts, but not too bad to make it unreadable. There are tropes of a contemporary romance in here, but it's incredibly difficult, I think, to get behind the romance because your man's a bit of a bellend, to be honest. He's a bit cold and angry and distant and just, yeah, I could see people enjoying this. As I said, it's whimsical and fun in some parts, in fairness. Just for me, unfortunately, it didn't quite hit the mark. And I probably will just be getting rid of this book and passing it on to somebody who will enjoy it a bit more than me. Next up then, we have the second in a trilogy, and the trilogy is the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, and the second book is The Girl in the Tower. So it's the sequel to the well-loved The Bear and the Nightingale. I really enjoyed that book. So this first novel was set like in the Russian wilderness, where we follow our protagonist Vasya. It was quite dark, gothic, full of like Russian myth. I just thought it was really kind of magical and really interesting. In this one, we're still with Vasya, but she finds herself in a city, I think it was Moscow, and she's hiding a big secret from everybody except for her siblings. And if she's found out, it could mean death or exile for both of her siblings and herself. As it's a sequel, I can't really say too much more, but I did enjoy it. Probably not as much as the first book for me, but I think if people thought the first book was a little bit slow, this is probably a little bit more fast paced. It does have a lot going for it. It still has Arden's wonderful writing, and I really enjoyed like the new kind of setting and the new characters. It still felt quite mythologically is that a word? It's definitely not a word. I just think a lot of people will enjoy this book. There's plenty of references to like Russian folklore, and in a nutshell, I'm looking forward to picking up the final book in the trilogy to see where it goes. So this month I just must really have been on like a let's listen to thrillers on audiobook buzz, because I listened to quite a few of them. So the next one then that I listened to was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. Again, didn't really know what to expect, but had heard that the production of this story alone was actually incredible. So I picked it up from my library app, gave it a go, and the production was, in fairness, top tier. We follow two women, Alex and Josie, and Alex kind of really has her life together. She has a podcast, she's well known, she has this lovely home, this beautiful family. And then Josie, just something a little bit less shiny about Josie. She seems to be much more quiet, hasn't had as much success in her life. But what's interesting about these two women is that they were both born on the same day in the same hospital, and they come across each other as they're both celebrating their birthdays, their 45th birthdays, in the same pub. And then Josie tries to follow up with Alex because she feels like, hey Alex, I have a story about my life that could be really interesting for your podcast. And so they end up entangled in this quite strange relationship, and Josie seems kind of fine at first, but she starts to weave this like strange and dark and confusing story about her life, and throughout we kind of witness a darkness peeking out of Josie, but you're not really sure what to believe, what not to believe. I didn't love the characters, and I didn't always love the overall direction of the book, but I did find myself kind of wanting to come back to it over and over just to see what was happening, what was going on. So as a thriller goes, I don't know, I thought it was quite compelling in some ways. I don't know if I would have enjoyed this as much if I'd read it physically, interestingly enough, because I'm not so much an audiobook person usually. Anyway, and guess what I read next? It was definitely another audiobook of a thriller. This one was my first Shari Lapina, so it was An Unwanted Guest, and it is another kind of snowed in one. So we follow an unlikely group of people as they find themselves in this quaint little hotel and just basically unable to leave until the weather improves. Sounds familiar. But as with the haunting party, soon enough a body shows up. We find ourselves suspecting the other guests in the hotel and the staff as well. So when the first guest dies, it looks like an accident, but then another body shows up, and that's when the guests really start to panic. In fairness, if I was in a hotel with a dead body, regardless of how they had died, I'd still feel a little bit panicked. But anyway, I just didn't really feel bothered when the guests were dying. Didn't really care that much about the characters. Even now I'm like straining to remember what actually happened in the book. It was fine, but to be honest, I would probably save my time and just go read a different thriller if I was in the mood for something like this. Like, it was fine. I also find myself feeling really weird about thrillers in that, like, oh, somebody died. Oh well. Whereas, like, I'm normally like a really kind of character driven reader. I get really invested in my characters, but I always find with a thriller, it's like, oh, these people are all disposable. Who's going to die next? And that is very fun sometimes, but I just find it a kind of a stark contrast to what I usually like to read. Then the next book is an interesting one. So I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with the lovely Australian Christiane Jones, and she self-published a book called A Year in Tokyo, which I have right here. If I used my two hands, I'd be able to do things a little bit better. So this is a book that has been sitting on my shelves since December 2022. So not the Christmas just gone, but the Christmas before. So fun fact is my partner and I both bought this book for each other as a surprise. The other one not knowing, which was kind of fun. So this is a self-published kind of part memoir, part travel guide. It's interspersed with like whimsical illustrations. They're really lovely, and gorgeous photos of Tokyo and its changing seasons. It was lovely to read something by a YouTuber that I followed for quite some time, and the writing is actually really great in it as well. I will say that having read the book, it is probably something that's more suited for somebody who is planning to travel to Tokyo or is familiar with Tokyo, just to get some sort of geographical context. I mean, it's written really well and there's lots of information about lots of different parts of Tokyo, but for me, I would love to go to Tokyo, but it's not something that's going to happen anytime soon, and I just felt a little bit ungrounded reading it. But don't let that put you off. Like, I felt like it was really lovely, and it's kind of the book that I will definitely hang on to and reference, and it should be really useful if I ever somehow magically win the lotto and get to travel to Tokyo. But yeah, it's really lovely, and I definitely would recommend it, especially for people who are familiar with Christiane Jones. Next then is a book that's been sitting on my shelves for a while, and I feel like this book is really, really well known. And I just hadn't read it, and it's really well loved as well. I picked up the beloved Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, and my copy in particular is beautiful. It's illustrated by an artist called Elise Hurst. We get these lovely kind of black and white illustrations throughout. I mean, they're next level, like they're really lovely. So this edition is an illustrated edition, and the illustration in it like really made this book. Obviously the book itself is great too, but I think I had the wrong expectations going into this book. So this book is like a really well-known book, and I thought that it was like this kind of whimsical children's book that was really lovely and heartfelt. I was wrong. That's not what this book is. So we follow a man as he finds himself back in the area that he grew up in, and he encounters people and a place that he hasn't actually seen since he was a child. This brings back memories of his childhood, and soon we find ourselves immersed in kind of like a strange, dark and truly fantastical story. Like, in some senses I found like it read similar to like a modern myth or something. I was really surprised by how bleak this story was, about how dark it was, how adult it is. I really had the wrong preconceptions about this book going into it, and I think maybe if I'd known better what kind of book this was when I was heading into it, I would have enjoyed it a bit more. But I just found myself a little bit like, oh, okay. And like, it was good. I did enjoy it, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I had anticipated that I would. It was one of those books that I've been putting off because it's like, yeah, I'm going to love that one. It's beautifully strange and clever, and it's like a really quick read as well. This book looks a lot thicker than it actually is because my edition has so many lovely illustrations in it as well. The final book that I read in December and in 2023 was, here I am rustling around to get it. So it was one of the books that I was gifted by my brother and his family for Christmas. So that book, of course, is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. And it was my first Octavia Butler book. Probably another one that I just realised it is not the last book that I read in 2023. It is the second last book that I read in 2023. Don't mind my brain. So this is another one that I've been wanting to read for years. So I was delighted to find it in my little Christmas box. The book was written, I think, about 30 years ago, but what's really interesting is it opens up in 2024 and then kind of goes on from 2024 to like 2027 or 2028, I think. So we're kind of reading about current day events, but from the perspective of an author who was writing 3 decades ago, which I thought was kind of cool. So we're in America, and America is a place of pure chaos. Arguably might be the same now, but anyway, basically violence and thievery kind of rule, and the only people that are kind of safe are like the truly rich and powerful. Our main character is a teenage girl named Lauren, and she's the daughter of a minister. But she has a power that she has to keep secret, and this power is basically that she can feel the pain of others. Sometimes a blessing, sometimes not so much so, and she has to keep it quiet because it's something that people can easily use against her. So we read this book from the perspective of her journal entries, which also was quite interesting. One night when Lauren's feeling probably less safe than she had been in the beginning of the book, something happens and everything changes, and Lauren finds herself kind of thrown out of the environment that she's grown up in. And I won't lie, friends, I didn't love this one. I know that's really bad to say because when you look at the reviews for this, everybody loves it, but I just didn't. I respect it for how smart and how on point it is, and how it actually really genuinely parallels society so closely. So props to Octavia Butler for that. Our protagonist is also in the process of like recording her faith, and as she meets people on the road, she kind of shares this with them and her vision of the future and the religion that she's building. I really found this aspect of it to be a little bit off-putting, but maybe that was just coming from somebody who doesn't really ascribe to like any faith or organized religion or anything of the sort. I've less than zero interest or belief in organized religion, each their own of course, but it's just not for me. I know that this book is incredibly well loved and respected, so I will say that it is one worth reading, and I probably missed something in it, like my little jelly brain here just completely like glossed over some really important interesting points in here. But yeah, I think the vast majority of people would see my opinion here as just plain wrong, but it's actually another one that I'm going to get rid of after this video, unfortunately. And then of course we had done my rehearsal for me saying my final book of the year. My actual real final book of the year was The Mad Women's Ball by Victoria Mass, and this is translated by Frank Wynne. This novel is a historical novel set in Paris in 1885. So Dr. Charcot, I believe his name was, holds Paris in the palm of his hand because he does these huge displays of hypnotism on women in the Salpêtrière asylum, which houses women who have been deemed mad or hysterical, or you know the drill, and cast out from society. The truth, of course, is likely probably much more complicated. A lot of these women were just simply inconvenient or unwanted wives or wayward daughters, those who have lost something precious, you know. So once a year this huge event in the asylum called the Mad Women's Ball, where outsiders are invited to come in to the hospital where there is this big ball, and it's something that the patients in the hospital look forward to every year. And of course the people coming in love going as well, just come in and gawk at all the weirdos. I say that very lightly. I don't believe people that end up in psychiatric institutions are weirdos. They're unwell and often unfortunate as well. So yeah, but from their perspective, they just want to go in and gawk at the people who have been shut away in this asylum. We follow 2 main characters in this book. One is Genevieve, who is a senior nurse who has been working, I think, in this hospital for about 20 years. She has shunned religion entirely and placed her faith in science. And then our other main character is a girl called Eugenie, and she's a 19-year-old daughter of this rich family who found herself locked away in the asylum. So Genevieve obviously believes that she isn't mad herself, but instead has a special and unorthodox gift. And this gift is actually quite interesting, and She's determined to escape the asylum, but to do this, she's going to need Genevieve's help. So this book is really short. I think it was less than 300 pages, and I basically read it in one sitting on New Year's Eve. And I found it engrossing, I found it entertaining, I found it bloody well infuriating, but for the most part I did really enjoy it. That said, I do love to anger myself by reading books about women who are hysterical or who are ignored or simply brushed to the side and not believed, and I guess that's sort of a special interest of mine. The writing is really lovely and it's very readable, and for me was a lovely way to finish out my 2023 reading year. So yeah, I feel like we're losing light really fast here, so I've spoken as quickly as I could about these books. Bit of a mixed reading month for me, I think. Some of them I enjoyed, some of them not so much. That's okay. That was 2023, so that's the last of my 2023 content. Don't forget to give me a like, a subscribe, give a comment down below. If you don't know what to comment, maybe comment a little candle, because I'm basically lit by candlelight here at the moment. I hope you're minding yourself, and I hope you're minding each other, taking care, taking it handy, going into the new year slow and not putting too much pressure on yourself. And if you are, you're getting no forehead kiss from me. None. But look, life happens. I just hope you're doing okay. That's it from me. I hope to chat to you next week. Take care, and I will talk to you very, very soon. Bye bye. Mwah. That's for those of you who are minding yourself. Bye.